.NET for Devices presents EvenTiles Part 5 using isolated storage. So hello once again. We are going to continue where we left in episode 4 of EvenTiles. So I'm going to start Visual Studio. I'm going to open the solution EvenTiles, just the same one that we left in episode 4. Now let's just take a look what was going on from a functionality point of view. So what I want to do first is close all documents inside Visual Studio to have a clearer look. And what we're going to do is just run the application one more time as it was in episode 4. So I'm going to deploy to the emulator, making sure that we have the emulator entirely visible inside our screen. And here is the application starting again. So what we're going to do is go to the settings screen. There I'm going to add a little bit of text for my backside of my secondary tile. What you can see is that I can add a few characters there. We have a restore button visible. And I can of course restore. And I can go back to my main page. And again returning to my settings page, and you can see that my modifications were still there. But if I terminate the application and then maybe start another application, or if I like switch my application to the background, what in fact I was doing, and then using the back key going back to my application, what you can see is that we still have those modifications available because our application was still available in memory. Now this time I'm completely terminating the application. You could see that because Visual Studio stopped debugging, and if I'm now starting the application again, and if I'm returning to the settings screen, what you can see is that that modified text is not stored inside my application. And that is the big topic for this part number 5 of EvenTiles. We're going to make use of isolated storage to actually persist the information that we changed in the settings screen for that string that we want eventually to be displayed on the backside of a secondary tile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my app.xaml.cs file, because that's the file in which we're going to make use of isolated storage. So the first thing you see there already is that I have a constant string defined containing a default string for the back content of my secondary tile. I also have a property being the actual string, and what we're going to do is add a private member, and that private member is going to be of type isolated storage settings, and that acts sort of as a dictionary in which I can store objects and I can access them by using keys, and those keys are just simple string variables. I'm going to add a using statement here to import the namespace, and we're going to create a variable of type isolated storage settings. We're going to call that app settings, and we're going to just assign that to my isolated storage settings.application settings. Now that is a static object, and if it's not existing, it will be created, and if it's created, we always get a reference back to that same particular instance of application settings that is available in isolated storage, and the implementation is actually it's implemented as a singleton, so there's only one instance of that available throughout my entire application. What I'm also going to do is create another string constant variable, and that will contain a key. I'm going to use that key to access a particular object in isolated storage. I'm just going to, give that key sort of a meaningful name. I'm going to call it key actual secondary back content in an abbreviation. And we simply going to store our actual secondary back content inside that key. Now the last time we initialized our string property that contains that back content string inside the constructor, but we're not going to do that anymore. That's not necessary, because this time we're going to make use of the application launching and application closing events, and launching will be called each time our application starts. Closing of course will be called each time our application terminates. There's also an activated and deactivated, but we'll talk about those more in another episode of EvenTiles. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure, check if our dictionary contains an object with a key and that key is that constant string that we were defining earlier. So that's our key actual secondary back content. If that key does not exist, then we're just going to create a brand new entry in our application settings with that key and with the default string that we want to display inside or on the back side of our secondary tile that we are going to create later. So now, guaranteed, we have that particular key available and also a value belonging to it, being the default value that we already initialized in a constant string as well. And this results in the fact that we now have that key available with an object inside our dictionary of application settings. So now we can use that key to initialize our actual secondary back content property. It always contains a valid string now. It's either going to be the default string or it's going to be a string that will be stored whenever the user terminates the application. But always guaranteed now we have in app settings a value with that key available. Since that value can be an object of any type, we need to cast that to a string variable to actually be assigned to our actual secondary back content string. Now when we are closing the application, we're going to do something else, because in that situation the user might have changed that particular string in the settings screen. So what we're going to do here, no matter what, in our application settings, we're going to use our same key again to refer to that back content, and we're just going to store in that dictionary entry the actual secondary back content properties value. So each time we terminate the application, the latest version of that string will be stored. And that's basically all the functionality we need, because in our settings page what you can see already is that, hey, if we are leaving that settings page with the unnavigated from, we're already storing our current value from a text box into that particular property that was defined in the application object. So here is our application running again. We're going to modify our string, having an even number of tiles. We're going to change that again, so we're going to say like having this number of tiles. You can see it's not the default string anymore because the button appears. We're going to go back. We're going to go back to the settings. We didn't leave the application, so that string is still there. This time we're going to terminate the application. The debugger stopped, so we're going to take a look if we are starting the application again and moving again to the settings screen, what's going to happen. And now you can see that, hey, over an application termination start combination, actually our string for that secondary tile is now persisted. So let me change that string one more time. So I have again an altered string in there. And what we're going to do now is, instead of terminating the application, we're going to start another application here. And we're going to move back to our original application, and what you could see is that, hey, we still had that same string available. If I'm starting the application again, that same situation will return. So I have my modified string here, but now I'm going to do something else. And for that, what I'm going to do is go to Visual Studio. I'm going to go to the project settings of our project, and what we're going to do is mimic a situation called tombstoning, in which the application will physically be removed from memory. So we're going to do that in the debug settings of our project properties. I'm just going to select that checkbox there, and don't worry about that application state being tombstoning, because we're going to cover that in detail in one of the next series of EvenTiles, but or in one of the next episodes, of course, I mean. But let's see what's going to happen right now. So I have still my modified string here. I'm going to restore maybe my original string, but what I'm going to do now is again start another application. application or go back to the start screen. Then I'm gonna move back to our application, and let's just take a look what's gonna happen right now, because this time our application was removed physically from memory. It was not stored in memory, but it came into this specific situation called tombstoning. And what is happening right now is that the debugger stopped and it told us that we have an argument null exception that was unhandled. And what that means is that in this situation there is a variable that was not properly initialized, and that is actually our property called actual secondary back content. So this time, instead of getting through that launching event where that variable was initialized, we now have an uninitialized variable. And that is something we need to provide a little bit more code for. So this situation resulted now in an application that is not correct, and in episode 6 of EvenTiles we're going to take a further look in how we can solve this particular problem and maybe a few other things as well.